Can the West Virginia Mountaineers finally get a top 10 ranked win in the Neal Brown era and maybe even get him off the hot seat? Or will the TCU Horned Frogs continue their surprise run towards a potential Big 12 title game? Well, I'm bringing a guest along, and we're going to talk about it. So pull up a chair, sit back, relax, and let us serve you up this shot of top shelf college football content. What is up, college sports fans, fellow members of Mountaineer Nation? This is Coos, and welcome into another edition of Coos' Corner. So pull that chair up, and on tap for today's show, we're previewing the West Virginia TCU game that's coming up this Saturday, October the 29th at 12 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time in Morgantown, West Virginia. Will air on ESPN. To talk about this game, I brought along a very special guest. Let me introduce you folks to none other than Parker. Parker, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Kuz, man. Thanks for having me tonight. I'm super excited for this game. This TCU West Virginia game always seems so dramatic every time they play, and so it'll sure be a stressful, if not fun, weekend for both of us.
Absolutely. And real quick, before we get into the nuts and bolts of the show, will you please plug your stuff? Let everybody know where they can find you at. Obviously, I've got your Twitter handle on the screen, but you're in several different places, so go for it.
Yeah, I'm kind of a internet football guy these days, doing a bunch of stuff different places. BetUS, I do a college football show that focuses on picks and predictions and breaking down matchups. That's on YouTube on Tuesdays and Wednesdays at 11 Mountain, so noon Central Time. I host a TCU podcast with my buddy Grant. We do just some statistical and nerdy breakdowns and some storylines, kind of vibes, discussions about TCU football as well over at Purple Theory. And a couple things here or there, but if you follow me on Twitter, you'll find, the graphs and the previews and all that there.
Cool. As you can see, everybody, I've got his Twitter handle at Stats of War right above his head here on the screen. And I want you to touch a little bit on, I found this a little bit fascinating because I'm not good at analytics. It's not my strong suit, but it's right up your alley. And you actually have come up with your own statistical model. Can you kind of explain that to people and how they can find that?
Yeah. So I like to say that I'm like very dumb. I don't know a lot of things. And so I like to put models to things and put numbers to things and learn about them. And so that's kind of how I interpret football, is looking at through that lens. So yeah, I scraped some data from the NCAA.com in R Studio. Those are the programs that I use. And then I kind of transform that data. A big thing that I'll use is an expected points added model. And so expected points added is a really simple stat. All it does is kind of help us with a simple problem. If you get 3 yards on 1st and 10, that's a bad play, right? But if you get 3 yards on 3rd and 3, that's a good play. Well, yards per play doesn't really differentiate between those two. Expected points added just says, how much did you increase the probability you're going to score on a given play? And so it gives us a little bit more yards to points in context. And so I transform that, I run it there, and then I spit out some other stats I like. I have some quality possession stats about how well you control a game, about how well you move the ball, run pass splits, rush rate over expected, and toss those into some previews. And that spits out a little matchup model that kind of says, given a team stat profile like this and another team with a stat profile like this, what can we reasonably expect? And so I don't so much love the predictions, but what I love to do is go back and look at the predictions and say, this was different than reality, or the reality was different than the prediction. What did we learn? So using the numbers kind of helps me learn about football a little bit.
But let's dive right into the game, man. This is going to be an intriguing matchup. Obviously, two teams going in opposite directions, it seems like. You've got TCU sitting at 7-0. I mean, in my opinion, a surprise team. I don't know, outside of maybe the TCU fan base, and I don't even know if the TCU fan base expected them to be this good. But I didn't, because obviously new coach, new staff, all these changes, you don't expect a team to come in and be this good. But, man, TCU's rocking and rolling, and obviously you've got West Virginia, who from week to week looks like a completely different team. You just got boat raced by Texas Tech. Looks like they didn't even make an effort, to be honest, in the second half. So, and obviously, Neal Brown's on the hot seat right now. Fan base is clamoring for him to basically to be fired for I'm not going to sugarcoat it. That's basically what a large portion of the fan base is wanting. So, let's jump right into this game. The betting odds for this game, when you look at ESPN, the ESPN matchup predictor has TCU as a 67.9% chance to win the game, West Virginia with only a 32.1% chance to win. In Vegas, has the line right now at -7.5 for TCU, and the over/under is at 69. So, Parker, put your betting hat on since you do a little bit of stuff for BetUS. What do you think about those odds and that spread?
I like it. So I got burned last week with West Virginia, man. I thought they would keep it close against Texas Tech, and they had a lot of scoring opportunities. So I thought it was going to be. I thought they were going to do a little better against that Texas Tech team. I was a little disappointed. 7.5 here. I'm a little nervous about. TCU's gotten off to a slow start this season, especially in the first half. It seemed like, they've been down 17 in the Oklahoma State game. 14-18 in the Kansas State game, and only scored 10 points in the first half of Kansas. So I think that 7.5 is hard because they're going to probably have to overcome a deficit if they keep playing the way they are. Just looking at kind of the spot and how how West Virginia has been doing, they're 4-3 against the spread. TCU's 5-1-1 against the spread, but West Virginia is kind of trending a little downward. I think 7.5 is a lot, but if I had to pick this game, I think I would go with TCU here, especially because it's not a night game in Morgantown. If it was a night game, I'd probably be riding with West Virginia.
Yeah, and I agree. I actually thought the spread would be a little higher than 7.5 because of what happened last week with these two teams, and then but it is in Morgantown, and West Virginia, for whatever reason, they have really struggled on the road, especially under Neal Brown. We did get the win in Blacksburg. We played decent against Pitt. Of course, it turns out Pitt is not as good of a team as we thought they were going to be, but those are two regional games against two, and let's face it, Virginia Tech's a bad football team. But when West Virginia plays an average or above average team in Big 12 play on the road, they've struggled, and they have, honestly, since Neal Brown's gotten here. But because this is at home, I do think the spread, that's probably why they have that 7.5 number there. To me, if this is in Fort Worth, this game is probably a 10 or 10, at least a 10, maybe higher, in my opinion. The over-under at 69, that's probably pretty about right, in my opinion, I guess.
Yeah, let me do some back of napkin math real quick on that over.
Yeah.
So TCU averaging about 36. TCU's averaging 44.7 a game. West Virginia 34.9 on offense.
Mm-hmm.
West Virginia 33 on defense. TCU 26. 69 is right at that spot. That's like 37, 33 or something. Man, that's pretty close. I think this team would go over. TCU's got some defensive issues, and Bryce Ford Wheaton's a dude. I think there'll be a lot of points here. I'd be inclined for the over.
Yep, and I kind of agree with you. I do this for whatever reason this season. Most of West Virginia's games, the over/under has been like in the 50s. This game, I was glad to see it at least get up in the upper 60s, which to me makes more sense. But if I was going to bet, I would bet the over. But there again, 69 is a pretty good number in my opinion.
Yeah, I feel like they've been doing a really good job with numbers this year. There's been a couple I wouldn't touch, and generally I don't like to bet something that's that high of a total. But with the way that West Virginia has played, with the way TCU's defense has looked, and the fact that you have to factor in, like, TCU is also looking to make statements in terms of like national competition. Mm-hmm. So even if it is, really one-sided, TCU's still capable of putting, 40, 45 points on somebody. I think an over is probably the right play here.
Yeah. And by the way, if any of you folks do decide you want to bet this game, I'm a BetUS affiliate. You can hit the BetUS link in the description box of this video or in this podcast, and use that link to place your bet. Help me out, and you'll also get if it's your first bet, use promo code JOIN125. You get 125% bonus. But anyway,
they're doing some crazy matching at BetUS. I'm a company man, so I'm plugging them as well. But they're doing about as good of matching as anywhere for. So make sure you go take advantage of that for sure.
Yeah. Thank you. But yeah, and by the way, Parker and I will give our score predictions to the game at the end of this episode. So stay tuned for that. Let's jump in real quick. I want to touch on the stats here a little bit. The team stats really tell the story of these teams. Right here you have it. Points per game. You've got TCU at 44.7, West Virginia 34.9. Points allowed per game, TCU 26.7, West Virginia 33.7. Total yards, TCU 522.1, West Virginia 436.6. Yards passing, TCU 295, West Virginia 262. Yards rushing, TCU at 227, West Virginia only 174. Yards allowed, TCU at 398.6, West Virginia 405.9. Passing yards allowed, 260 for TCU, 275.7 for West Virginia. Rushing yards allowed, you've got 138.4 for TCU and 130.1 for West Virginia. So basically, the only stat that West Virginia is doing better than TCU in is basically rushing yards allowed, and it's by a very small margin. So, um, I mean, to me, it just tells the story. What can you say about these stats here, Parker?
Yeah, so I like to think of it in terms of that EPA, expected points added stat, and I have TCU at 12th overall and West Virginia at about 49th in the FBS out of 65 65 Power 5 teams.
Yeah.
So definitely two stories of teams that are of different qualities. And in terms of, that rushing efficiency, I do have West Virginia a little bit better defensively against the rush. 48th against the rush relative to 126th out of all FBS teams against the pass there. So there's definitely some truth to they've been a little bit better against the rush there. Right. But TCU, I think the thing that's so important about their offense is they're really balanced. They're 12th in passing efficiency and 12th in rushing efficiency. And second on early downs. So first and second downs, kind of open situations. Can you get those explosive plays? They're second in the FBS behind only Ohio State in terms of early downs explosiveness. Wow. I think that just tells a story of the offense really, really clicking. West Virginia's defense 117th in early downs EPA allowed. So definitely some very stark differences between these two teams. And I feel like a lot of West Virginia's offense is still hypothetical. Like I want to believe. And when it clicks, there's these drives that look so good, but man, they're 34th overall in offense is what I have them. But it feels like their sequencing and their finishing drives just aren't as good as I want them to be for them to be a whole complete kind of air raid offense first team like they're trying to be.
Right. Yeah, that's a good assessment. I mean, those numbers tell a huge story. And to me, it coincides with the eyeball test. And as a fan who's watched every game, I had to listen to last week's game because I was traveling, but has either watched or listened to every game the West Virginia has played this year, man. And I've actually been to most of them live, and they have had to kick a lot of field goals this year. Now, our field goal kicker is doing an excellent job. I think he's 11 for 11 on the year, so he's doing great. But you and I both know in this conference, Parker, you've got to get 7 points when you get in the red zone, man. And West Virginia is just too many times just coming up short. And I think that's that probably plays a huge role into those numbers you're talking to there.
Yeah, so I have them at this is crazy. Okay, I have them at 17th in a stat I call Eckel rate. It's just how often do you generate a scoring opportunity, right? They're 17th in generating scoring opportunities, but they're 41st in finishing opportunities. Yeah. So huge disparity in kind of the quality possessions they're generating and how well they're doing. Yep. Last week, I mean, shoot, I tweeted this out a little bit earlier today because I was just some Texas Tech fans were asking me some questions about the game because the net success rate was actually pretty close in terms of how they moved the ball down to down, but it was all finishing drives last week. On separate drives last week, man, this is crazy. Texas Tech got 10 points total, and they had West Virginia got 10 points total. They had 1st and 10 at the Texas Tech 20, 1st and 10 at the Texas Tech 29, 1st and 10 at the Texas Tech 28, 1st and 10 at the Texas Tech 36, and 1st and 10 at the Texas Tech 28. Wow. All 5 of those happened on different drives. They got 10 total points in the game. Wow. That's crazy. That's crazy.
And And I actually saw you tweet that out, but I was busy doing something else and trying to multitask, which I'm not good at. And I somehow misread that as the drive starting on West Virginia's side of the field. So I misread that tweet, but I appreciate you clarifying that for me. That is a baffling stat right there.
Yeah, so, that's to me is so frustrating as a fan to watch a team where it's like, dude, you're getting to the other side of the field. Why are you not scoring points?
Yeah. And, in past games this year, it had been penalties. It wasn't penalties. We only committed 4 penalties in this game. So it was just in the Texas Tech game, I mean. So it was just turnovers for one and just, drive stopping, whether it be a play call that, in my opinion, was not right or just an errant pass, a drop, whatever it may be. Couldn't get the running game going. Just one thing after the other, basically. And you've got to give Texas Tech some credit for that. Their defense bowed up when they needed to and made stops when they needed to as well to take advantage of those West Virginia mistakes. But,
sure.
For TCU, man, I want to talk. This is a little bit off topic, but I want to touch on this for a minute. It just came to mind, and that is this: there's been a lot of talk the last couple of days about on Twitter primarily about TCU, and I personally don't think they're getting the respect they deserve right now. I've heard about how well every team they've played's had backup quarterbacks. I've heard, which is there's some truth to that now. Not every team, but most, and there's some truth to it. But injuries happen in this game, man, and you still have to win games. And two, I heard somebody talk about that TCU was just lucky. What do you have to say to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that TCU has some very clear flaws in the depth on defense. They changed from a 4-2-5 front to a 3-3-5 front, and so the defense is still transitioning. And there's some guys that might not be, totally suited to playing every down that are still out there. And there's some weaknesses in the linebacker core, for instance. But I will say, like, especially about the injured narrative. I mean, we saw what Spencer Sanders did last week against Texas. We know what he's capable of, him being injured during the Oklahoma game. We saw, a very feisty Jason Bean team just score a bunch of points against Baylor this weekend for Kansas. Right. And TCU was up, 34-10 on Oklahoma before Dylan Gabriel went out. So yeah, they have benefited from that for sure, but it's not like, they would have otherwise lost the game entirely.
Right.
And I would say that, I mean, if luck is going down by 3 scores and coming back and winning, that's a pretty impressive lucky streak.
Yeah,
I mean,
really.
There's definitely something going on that TCU's been able to dig themselves out of a hole a couple times there. That being said, I've said my expectations for this year were 8-4. And so I'm, 1, thrilled with what's going on, but 2, very skeptical that TCU is going to go the distance, especially with that. But they have played good teams and they have beaten good teams, and they have good teams to play down the stretch. I think it's really unfortunate they're getting Texas Tech later in the year as opposed to earlier in the year, because they probably would have beat them earlier in the year, and Texas Tech's going to kind of get hot and get rolling down here as they go. So I don't think TCU's lucky. I think that they had 82% returning production from last year. That's most in the conference. And in terms of team talent composite, they're 3rd in the Big 12 by a large margin. It is Texas and Oklahoma, a big jump, TCU, a big jump, Oklahoma State, West Virginia, those guys down there.
Yeah.
And so there's a ton of talent, and very clearly there were some leadership issues the last couple of years. And you have an offensive-minded head coach who's aggressive, who's smart, and says, we want to maximize our guys to play. I mean, Kendre Miller, and we'll go to players, I guess. I don't want to get ahead of us, but like TCU has 2 to 3 very good NFL caliber guys, and an offensive-minded head coach and an offensive coordinator who are really, insistent on making sure those guys get the ball and they score. That's different from last year as well. So very talented roster, very experienced roster, and a coach who really knows how to maximize talent. I don't think that's luck.
Right. I agree with you. You segued right into the players conversation, which the way I want to start that is I'm just going to go over the some of the key players on the offensive side and their stats. First, obviously, you have to look at the quarterbacks. You've got Max Duggan. Kudos to Max Duggan, one of my favorite players in college football. The guy, I'm not going to get into it right now for lack of time, but I encourage all of you to go back and read Max Duggan's story if you don't know his story. It makes you want to root for this young man. But he's 133 of 193 passing, which is 68.9% completion percentage for 1,871 yards, 19 touchdowns to only 1 pick. That's a phenomenal stat right there. On the other side, you've got JT Daniels, 162 out of 254, which is good for 63.8% percentage, 1,686 yards, 10 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. 3 of those came in one game this past weekend against Texas Tech. Daniels has played fine. He's not – this past weekend, he, in my opinion, played his worst game. But, he's not the reason we've lost. We've had a lot of drops. There's been a lot of, there's been games where the protection wasn't up to par. We couldn't run the ball real well, which made us one-dimensional. There's just been a lot of things that have went against West Virginia. But that being said, when you look at that stat line, 10 touchdowns and 6 picks is not what you would expect for JT Daniels, who was a 5-star guy coming out of high school. To the running backs, Kendre Miller, 120 carries, 731 yards, which is good for 6.09 a carry, and 10 touchdowns for the Horned Frogs. And then Tony Mathis Jr. for West Virginia, 99 carries, 492 yards, which is good for 4.97 yards per tote, and 5 scores. Receiving, my gosh, Quinton Johnston, guy's just a stud.
Dude.
Oh, man. 38 receptions, 574 yards, 15.1 yards per catch, 3 touchdowns. Bryce Ford Wheaton, 45 catches, 516 yards, which is 11.5 per catch, and 5 scores.
I'm being fair. Also, Bryce Ford
Yeah.
Wheaton is a dude. He gets that response as well. He's awesome, man. I love him.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I want to give a shout out too from West Virginia, Caden Prather on the other side of the offense for us. Teams have been focusing a lot more on Bryce Ford Wheaton, and he's been stepping up, making some big plays for us lately. Sam James has made some plays, but all of those guys, gotta talk about the negatives too here. They've dropped a lot of balls this year as well. And
yeah.
And just to be frank, Bryce Ford Wheaton and Sam James have dropped a lot of balls throughout their career. I don't know why. They can make some phenomenal plays, but then they'll have a drop at a key moment in a game that makes you just want to tear your hair out. No pun intended. As you see, I don't have any. I've already done
that. Not trying to rub salt in any wounds or anything, but in the Pitt game, Bryce Ford Wheaton had a drop that cost him a touchdown. That was just brutal.
Absolutely.
I mean, heartbreaking. Yeah,
it
heartbreaking.
was. And for the most part, the fan base did not get on him too bad for that because he had played so great that entire game. I mean, he's made 2 great catches that pretty much kept us in that game in the first place. So it was hard to jump on him too much. But you're right, and he did drop there, and he's made some other ones too, and so has Sam James, and even Caden Prather's made a couple drops. But that being said, I don't want to take away from what those guys can do. They can make some really big plays and have made some big plays for us this year. Who's the one guy on the defensive side of the? Well, first of all, I'm gonna let you talk about your offensive guys real quick. On the of the guys I mentioned, or is there anybody I did not mention that you expect will have a big game this week against the Mountaineers?
Yeah, I think obviously Kendre, obviously Quinton Johnston. The 2 names on the offensive side of the ball that you have to watch are Darius Davis, who's number 11, little guy. He returns punts as well. Super fast, super shifty. They'll get him going horizontally, jet sweep, rocket toss, running across the field in a mesh route, like very, very kind of Swiss Army knife kind of player as a secondary option. And then Jared Wiley, the tight end who was a transfer from Texas last year. He's 6'7", and he has tattoo sleeves. You can't miss him. And he's gotten really involved. He had his most targets of the season against Kansas State, 5 targets, 5 catches, 14.8 yards per reception and a touchdown. They've really relied on him in big moments in comebacks against Oklahoma State, against Kansas State. So he's somebody you got to keep track of too now. I think he's really getting to roll. So on the offensive side of the ball, those secondary options for TCU can really get you.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought Darius Davis up because I've watched that kid play this year a few times, and he is just it seems like every time he touches the ball, he makes something happen. And he reminds me a little bit of the guy we had years ago named Tavon Austin. I shouldn't say years ago, but several years ago. I'm not that old, but but yeah, he kind of reminds me of that type of player. You can line him up in the backfield, a slot. You can spread him out wide if you wanted to. Returns kicks, does a little bit of everything. Matter of fact, I think
very, very fun.
You said he wears number 11.
Yes.
Okay, I think that's number Tavon worn in the NFL. But anyway.
Awesome.
Just cute little trivia there. But for West Virginia, I think to me the key is offensively. Obviously, our offensive line has got to block well for JT Daniels, and we've got to complete some passes downfield. And obviously, it's cliche, I guess, but we have to run the ball better than we did against Texas Tech. There's just no doubt. We have to be. This offense is not going to function if it's not balanced. That's been proven. And this is not the air raid of Mike Leach where you can throw the ball every down. We've got to have balance. When we don't have balance, we struggle. So it's the key to me is going to be, and injuries is going to be key too, because 2 of our 3 running backs went down in that Texas Tech game. And as we record this, I don't know the status of those guys yet. So it'll be interesting to see who we have healthy for this game. But if we at least have 2 backs that can go, I feel okay with it. But they've got to play better than they played last week. I think they will because they're at home. And for whatever reason, like I said earlier, they're a totally different team at home, it seems like. But and then that should open up the passing game for JT and Bryce Ford Wheaton and those guys.
And don't sleep on that Texas Tech. I know I'm taking us all over the place. Don't sleep on that Texas Tech D-line, man. I think they're an underrated unit. Tyree Wilson is a freaking dude. I mean, he's a monster. And so I think that defensive line is just really good for Texas Tech too. Definitely, I think they're better than TCU. So that certainly works in the favor of maybe a little better run game for West Virginia this weekend.
Yeah, well, that's good to know because I everything I had heard about Texas Tech was that their defense, their defensive line was not that good. So I expected West Virginia to come out and run the ball really well, and it just didn't happen. So I was, as a West Virginia fan, you're thinking, well, crap, we just didn't play very well. But maybe the guys on the other side were just better. It happens. Yeah. Who's the defensive players to watch for TCU?
Yeah, so a couple names in the run game, especially the safeties, Mark Perry and Abe Kamara. Perry is number 3 and Kamara is number 14. The way the TCU's defense works right now is kind of the defensive linemen plug the gaps and then the linebackers plug the secondary gaps. It's called spill and kill. So they kind of funnel the runs to the safeties making those tackles. So you see those two guys involved a whole lot by design. At terms of edge rusher, Dylan Horton is a super athletic guy. He played safety in high school. He's got 11 tackles, 23 pressures, very, very disruptive. And then Demonic Williams is our nose tackle, 52. The big man in the middle has been so disruptive this year, just plugging those A gaps and pushing guys around. He is kind of the linchpin of this defense. You know, as far as he can clog up the line, that's how well the defense can function. So, and then of course out wide, Tre'Davious Hodges Tomlinson, LT's nephew. A really, really good corner that'll probably be matched up on Bryce Ford Wheaton. Those 4 guys I think are really the important ones for this weekend.
Right. Yeah, and for West Virginia on the defensive side, I mean, it's obviously going to come down to our defensive secondary and our linebackers. We have just struggled this year in the pass game all the way around. Guys are not lining up in the right spots. I mean, there were possessions for Texas Tech last weekend. I don't know if you noticed it if you watched the game, but there would be 4 Texas Tech receivers on one side and only 3 West Virginia DBs over there to cover them. And it happened multiple times. And I'm like, dude, we're in game 7 of the season. How is this still happening in game 7? I don't understand it. We were supposed to get our, Charles Woods, who was our star defensive back corner, got hurt in the first game of the season, came back to play a little bit in the Texas Tech game. They were wanting to play him about 20 snaps. According to Coach Brown, he got banged up again in that game. So who knows if he'll come back again. We really need him back there, man, because he brings a veteran presence. He's been there, he's done it, and he's a lockdown corner, man. And we just don't have anybody like that on this team right now, and we're struggling back there big time. So it's going to be, and our guys, because of that, because we're struggling so much back there, they can't do a lot of blitzing, and where we play a 3-man front, it's hard to get pressure on the quarterback. So it's just been a struggle all the way around, and it's just driving us fans nuts because we're like, man, if you're not going to cover anybody anyway, just blitz, man. I mean, what do you got to lose, right?
Yeah, look, if the guy's going to throw the ball to an open receiver downfield, at least maybe hit him. Yeah.
So the key to me is their defensive secondary and our linebacker positions have got to step up. And like I said, I hope and pray we get Charles Woods back this week, but who knows if that's going to happen. But obviously Dante Steele, hopefully he can create some havoc up front. He's our big name guy there, and Jordan Jefferson plugging the middle up at nose tackle. We've got Sean Martin defensive end on the other side. If those guys can get some pressure on the quarterback, that'll definitely help those back end guys as well. So we'll see if they can do that. But real quick, let's go to keys to victory. What are your keys to victory for TCU in this game, Parker?
Keys to victory are start strong for TCU. Don't dig yourself in a hole. Reduce that variance of having to, get out of those big leads on those early drives. So TCU's got to score early, kind of control the game state, because West Virginia's a team that if TCU fools around and lets them stay in it, could dictate the pace of play and could absolutely win. On the flip side, I think for TCU's defense, the key is don't let mistakes turn into touchdowns. Right? If you get, they're young. They're working to gel together. If a guy gets open and he gets a catch, make sure you get him down. Make them earn those points. Don't give away those explosive touchdowns.
Great keys of victory. I think I agree with both of those. For the Mountaineers, I'm going to say on offensively, I touched on this earlier. We have to be able to run the football, because if we are not balanced and JT has to stand back there and throw this ball 40, 50 times, I think it will allow TCU to tee off on him. We don't have our offensive line is doing okay, but we're weak at the tight end position right now. Our starting tight end Michael Laughlin's out for the year. The guy we brought in from the transfer portal, Brian Palende, has been getting really low ratings from Pro Football Focus on it. So they're going to have to figure out a way to run the football, and that's going to be key to me, because if we can get 150 yards on the ground, I think we could have a really good chance to win. If not, I think it's going to be a long day. Now, defensively, have to force turnovers, because we're likely not going to we play a bend but don't break style of defense. That's just what we have to do. So in order to switch the game around and flip the game on its head, we've got to steal some possessions and got to force some turnovers, which we have not been doing at a high clip. We did it in the Baylor game, but that's really the only game this year West Virginia has done that at a high clip, and it really won that game for us. So they've got to when you're a defense that has trouble stopping people, what do? You got to force turnovers. That's the only way you can overcome that, and we have to do that in this game. Hopefully, get some pressure on the quarterback, maybe force a few errant throws here and there. And two, one thing I haven't even mentioned, and that's Max Duggan's running ability. They've got to contain Max Duggan, whether it's put a spy on him or keep an eye on him or whatever, but they've got to figure out a way to keep him from killing them in the run game as well. That's going to be critical.
Yeah, and honestly, he's been a little reluctant to do that this season. I think he's trying to be in the pocket a little bit more, but he's still been able to spout it off a little bit and kind of be elusive. So he's definitely something to keep track of. Yeah,
I'll tell you, it seems like this guy feels like we've been playing this guy for 20 years, man. I swear.
Yeah, really, man. 2019 seems like such a long time ago, doesn't it? That's crazy.
Yes, it does. All right. And I just touched on the keys of victory for West Virginia. Real quick, let's go to the score prediction. I'll leave it up to you first. What do you think? Who do you think wins and by what score?
Okay, so full disclosure, I'm going to run all my full models and post them tomorrow morning. So I haven't run my full model yet. Okay. And so this is back in the napkin math, and it might change in the morning. But you'll have to follow and see. That's fine. I'm going to go TCU 38, West Virginia 30. So TCU a win and a cover, but they give up some points to West Virginia, enough to make it uncomfortable.
Gotcha. That's pretty close to where I'm coming in. I don't run a model. I'm not, like I told you earlier, I'm not a stats guy. I just base mine strictly off of what I see on the stat sheet and what I see from the eye test. And I do not like this matchup for the Mountaineers. I think we are outmanned at a lot of positions, struggling on defense. I don't think we're going to be able to stop Quinton Johnston. I don't know if we'll be able to stop Kendre Miller in the run game. I don't know if we'll be able to stop the quarterback run game. All of those are things we've struggled with at times this year. And I just feel like TCU is going to be able to score almost at will against us, probably put up, I'm going to say probably in 42 points is what I'm going with for TCU. And I look for West Virginia to probably get around the 30 range with 30, say 42-31 TCU.
Yeah,
where I'm going.
Okay.
So you've got it 38-30 TCU, and I've got it 42-31 TCU. Sorry, Mountaineer Nation, but just trying to be real. Looking at, we've all seen.
To be fair, I'm wrong all the time. I'm wrong a lot. So
I am too. Trust me. I picked us to lose the Baylor too, and we didn't. So maybe I just need to start picking us to lose every game, and it'll turn the season around. So anyway, well, Parker, listen, man. One more time, I'm going to let you plug yourself and your stuff. Where can my followers find you at?
Yeah, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Stats of War. That's where you kind of see the hub for all the links and stuff I do, and a bunch of cool graphics there. And again, questions about stats or the game or whatever. I love to interact with people, so hit me up there. And make sure you tune into the BetUS College Football Show on YouTube at 11 Mountain, so noon Central. I keep saying the wrong time zone. Noon Central tomorrow, and on Wednesday we have a good time, hour and a half. My co-hosts, Gary and Kyle, are super smart betting guys. I'm like the football numbers nerd, and these are like very smart football betting guys, really great picks, really sharp minds. And we have a lot of fun doing it, and a really good, chat Q&A in there. So if you just search BetUS College Football Show on YouTube, it'll come up, and follow us there and tune in. It's a really good time.
What day of the week does that air again? Can you?
Tuesday and Wednesday at noon Central.
Gotcha. Okay. Noon Central would be 1 Eastern. For those of you on the Eastern time zone. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, perfect. Well, Parker, listen, man, I appreciate you coming on the show. It's been great chatting with you. I love your stats. I love your models you're putting out there and the graphics. I try to keep up with as much as I can. I think we've interacted a few times back and forth over the last few months. Before I even really knew who you were, I was already following your stuff and looking at your models, and I find it intriguing because, like I said, it's outside of my comfort zone. So I like to educate myself on different models that are out there and how people are coming up with all these different stats. Maybe I'll learn a little bit from it, but I appreciate
absolutely.
it again.
And that's all it is. Just a different point of view. So I'm flattered. I appreciate that. I'm really glad that you reached out, and I'm glad to talk anytime.
Absolutely. Well, everybody tune into this game Saturday, TCU at West Virginia, 12:00 p.m. Eastern time, 11:00 Central time on ESPN. Should be an exciting game. I'm looking forward to watching it. Everybody, thanks for tuning in, and Q Country Roads.